Thank you so much for that introduction, Erica. I'd like to welcome to the stage Leader Posthumus. Leader Posthumus, are you out there?
Leader Pothemus, he's in. He just got. Yeah, I see it.
Of course, thank you so much. We are so excited to kick off the From Bills to Bitcoin policy, how policy is shaping the digital economy panel. And I'd also like to welcome Representative Leadbeter out to the stage. Thank you. Of course, thank you. And then last but not least, I'd also welcome my boss, Dennis Porter from Satoshi Action, who I have the privilege of working with.
Actually, here, let me see. I think my deal one. I have big hands.
Thank you for that. So we are very honored to be here with all of you today for this amazing panel. And I'd like to welcome all of our panelists who flew in today just to speak with all of you. And all these elected officials, including Dennis Porter, have on stage, are really driving Bitcoin policy forward. And so I think it'd be helpful for the audience to have a quick introduction of yourselves. So why don't we start with you, Representative Ledbetter?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. As Tom mentioned, my name is Robert Leadbetter. I'm a state representative in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Really excited to be here with all of you this afternoon. Exciting to see the momentum that this space has really taken on within the last year or so. I've been in the Bitcoin space since 2013, in office for a couple terms now. And really motivated to continue the work that we saw the white paper create with Bitcoin, thinking outside of the box, book pushing past the status quo, and really creating a new future without leaning into the historical context of the past. So, thank you all for having me, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation.
Like you said, I'm Representative Brian Postumus. I'm the majority floor leader in Michigan, and so what's interesting is the thing that attracted me to running for office is similar to what's always initially attracted me to Bitcoin, and that's just the idea of too much control in government and too much control over monetary policy. And so, initially, when I ran for the House of Representatives in Michigan, it was middle of COVID, and it was because we had a governor that was a lot different than the governor here in Florida. Everything in Michigan was locked down. We were considered the lockdown state in the country, and I had a problem with that overreaching government control and government authority. And so I figured if I was going to complain about it and argue about it, I should probably run for office and do something about it.
That's interesting. It's a similar story for me a little bit when it comes to Bitcoin. I saw very much so that we were headed down the wrong path with our government, with our country, and we needed to do something. And I was yelling into the void on my former podcast. We needed to get out there. We need to get active. And eventually that culminated into a launch of Satoshi Action in June of 2022. And we started getting to work right away at the state level where you can make incredible progress in a very short period of time. I often say DC is where dreams go to die. So we're in a great place now in DC. We might actually get something done, but very much looking forward to continuing to make progress with the folks on this stage and other state lawmakers all across the country.
So, Dennis, you just talked about how you launched Satoshi Action. Can you talk a little bit about why you launched Satoshi Action and the current status of the team and the progress that the Satoshi Action has made?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed radically over time. But in June of 2022, we launched because we just saw we were not headed on the right path. We needed to make some changes. And one of the very first things we wanted to do was we wanted to go and protect the most vulnerable part of this industry, of the entire Bitcoin industry. And that is, to me, that was Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining was under attack all across the country. You had environmental groups that had been convinced that Bitcoin was going to destroy the world and they needed to take it down. You had the anti-crypto army targeting Bitcoin mining. You had bills left and right popping up trying to outright ban Bitcoin mining. Well, that was where we started in June of 2022. And now we are in a radically different place where lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are starting to see the value. I mean, I'll give it credit to Republicans. They're certainly leading the charge on seeing the value of Bitcoin mining, but both sides are really starting to understand how important that is. And one of the big things, it's like a really big signal and the difference of where we are today is when we launched in June of 2022, middle of the SBF collapse, things were not looking great. Lawmakers, we'd call them and they'd say, isn't Bitcoin isn't that like not even a thing anymore? Like, isn't that dead now? Which is we've transformed more. If you move forward to where we are now today, we're in a place where lawmakers are DMing us, being like, "Hey, we want to learn more. We want to work on your model policy." So we're certainly in a radically different place than where we started.
I couldn't agree with you more. Having moved to DC in 2021, I've seen the industry, be relentlessly attacked to now our industry facing headwinds in a much more favorable political environment. And so I really want to, set the stage for policy and where we're at right now. And I think it'd be helpful for the audience to really understand, how does a bill become law? And so, Leader Postumus, why don't we start with you?
How does a bill become a law? It's interesting. I initially learned how a bill becomes a law through Schoolhouse Rock. I don't know if any of y'all have seen that, or the challenge is Schoolhouse Rock really leaves a lot out of the equation. Essentially, they say you introduce a bill into the House, it passes the House, passes the Senate, and then the governor or the president at the federal level signs it into law. Well, the challenge is, and what's important for you all to know, is that there is a lot of work that has to happen behind the scenes in order to get that bill to pass the House and pass the Senate and get the governor or the president to sign it into law. And that, frankly, that's where Satoshi Action Fund comes in really heavily and helps us develop that model policy, helps us with that with the research and the data behind it, and helps us to spread the knowledge about what is Bitcoin, what is this policy. What it comes down to is education. For the very most part, legislators or members of Congress or members of the U.S. Senate throughout the country really don't know much about Bitcoin specifically. But really, it's a lot of legislators know a little bit about a lot of things, but there's very rarely anything that they know a lot about. And all of you all know, when it comes to crypto and digital assets, it's hard to grasp it if you only know a little bit, if your knowledge is only an inch deep. And so, how a bill becomes a law really is going to come down to, can you all help educate your legislators? And can you all lean on organizations like Satoshi Action Fund to help spread the word throughout the entire state and throughout the entire country? Do you have anything to add to that?
Mr. Leader, everything that the leader just broke out, guys, is so true. When you guys are operating back home, running your operations, you are focused in the scope that you are translating value in. This is where Satoshi Action really is going to deliver a tremendous amount of value for you all, because as an advocate for Bitcoin, as an advocate for the space, lawmakers have become just dangerous enough to do stupid stuff in this.
It's funny because it's true.
Right. And so when the leader or myself are reviewing legislation and it speaks to digital assets or it speaks to cryptocurrency, and the language that is specific within those bills are wrought with error, it is up to us and incumbent upon us to not only point those erroneous issues out, but also then to draw forth a really clear and positive position, so that way the legislation that does move forward is something that's going to translate and benefit. However, if that's the scenario, are you guys all going to press the pause button on your operations and fly to Harrisburg or Michigan and figure out the 102 lawmakers that you need to educate? Or are you going to partner with Satoshi Action and lean into their subject matter expertise, their relationships with state level lawmakers across the country, and be confident in the advocacy that they're going to make? That's certainly the more efficient model. It's the model that I know the leader has leaned into with the bills that he's introduced. It's the model that I have been able to lean into with the bills that I think we're going to discuss here in a little bit, Tom. But again, this feedback loop of support that we all as a ecosystem can provide for each other, that is where it needs to start in order for a bill to pass. Because the question a moment ago was, how does a bill become law? I think what we need to also focus on is, how do we ensure that what does become law is a good law?
Preach. Another thing that really needs to be mentioned, there's an old saying, especially in politics, but it's true in life in general: if you're not at the table, you're on the table, right? With politics, the representative and I can attest all day long, there are special interests that are pulling at every single possible policy idea out there. And if you aren't at the table advocating for what it is that you think needs to be advanced, then it's not going to get heard. And so it's critically important that as people involved in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, digital assets, blockchain, being at the table by developing a relationship with your elected officials, whether that's your state representative or your member of Congress, you have to reach out. They will want to talk to you if you are persistent. In politics, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Can I add one more thing, Tom? So everyone in this room that has a self-hosted wallet, if the piece of legislation that just passed through committee this week in Pennsylvania were enacted into law that the bankers wrote, you would all be subject to money laundering charges. And so this week, my focus, or part of my focus, was to address the erroneous language within that and work in a bicameral capacity between the state Senate and the state House to ensure that missteps like that don't happen. Because the lawmakers that are ignorant to the significance of something like that just look at it as doing the right thing, because we don't want to have money launderers in our community. But what we can't have, what we cannot have, is that ignorance driving forward policy that is detrimental to our space and prohibitive to the progress that we've made.
That's incredible. And I think, one of the things that I think many people fail to understand is a lot of times people assume that when a politician introduces a bill, that they're just working on this on their own. And it really takes a public-private partnership in order to get a bill from introduction all the way to the finish line and have it signed by the governor. And so I think, Representative Leadbeter, I'd be curious to hear from your opinion. How do you work with groups such as Satoshi Action, when you're crafting legislation? Because ultimately, lawmakers can't do this on their own, and they rely on advocacy groups and educational groups and other groups to come in and, communicate to other lawmakers and educate them. So how do you work with outside groups to pass legislation that you're working on?
Sure, Tom. So the leader alluded to it a little bit ago. Guys, when you are dealing with a state like Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is a professional licensure, legislature, that is full-time. We have 203 members in our state house. We have 50 senators in the state Senate. We have staffers assigned to us. That is not the standard across the country. Across the country, most states are either part-time, limited in the amount of legislation that they can roll out, and not able to tap into the staff and resources that we have in Pennsylvania. And I'll let the leader speak to the resources and structure of his state. But what was mentioned a moment ago, that lawmakers often are jack of all trades or have the ability to cast a wide net and be a mile wide but only an inch deep, is so true. You all in this room are subject matter experts within the mining space. You guys are all subject matter experts in what you do. You will forget more than other stakeholders will ever know. And that is tremendous value that gets lost if it is not translated into the lawmakers that are proposing the legislation that we are navigating at the state level. Working with Satoshi Action and aligning with them gives lawmakers like myself the ability to ping Dennis and ping the team and ask what the gaps are in legislative language. When rolling out legislation, I don't know everything. There's a saying that my grandmother taught me: the guy who claims to be the smartest one in the room usually isn't. I don't like to claim to be the smartest one in the room. I'm the first one to say that I don't know something. So when I'm drafting legislation or requesting model legislation, having a resource like Satoshi Action gives me the confidence that I'm not just tapping into the subject matter expertise of Dennis or the subject matter expertise of Tom. I'm tapping into the subject matter expertise of every single stakeholder that has aligned with Satoshi Action, including you all in this room, including every single organization and individual that decides that they want to put their oar in the water and move it forward. When I was working with Dennis a few months back, and we were drafting the language for the reserve within Pennsylvania, in a collaborative capacity, and I think we're going to talk about this in a little bit, I had to bring in other stakeholders that opened up opportunity for incremental points of legislation, working with the Attorney General, working with the Treasurer. I did not have to think of those things. I got to collaborate on those things. And that's what translates into value. The last thing I'll say, and again, I think the leader can shine some light on too, given his majority position in Michigan, is that when we are building out this legislation, it is not enough to just propose it. It is not enough to introduce it. It is not enough to create the narrative. Those are all good things, and those are three legs to a stool that are important for us to be able to have a firm foundation. However, what is critical is that we continue to build upon the integrity of what we are advocating for. Because as the Overton window shifts and as the education grows within these stakeholders, those same individuals who are ignorant to this space, that are becoming more familiar to be dangerous, to fake like they know what they're talking about, will have to cross-reference and defer back to those who were able to defend successfully what they were advocating for. And so again, the work that the leader and myself have done in our prospective states in collaboration with Satoshi Action, that confidence is what I find so valuable, because I know that what we're advocating for is able to stand the test of time.
That's
So along those lines, so Michigan is actually a full-time legislature as well. Pennsylvania and Michigan are two of the few. So it's unique that we both had the opportunity to be here. In most states, you have a scenario like, actually, I think in Florida, the legislature meets for 100 days every other year. And they don't necessarily have the access to the staff that the representative and I probably do. And so, I have one staff member on my staff that has essentially been dedicated to digital asset policy, blockchain policy, and crypto policy for the last 3 months. He's worked out a couple other things, but 75% of his focus has been on detailing out how do we roll out legislation specific to this issue area. Now, and something to think about too is every state's level of acceptance and tolerance is going to be different, but every state's going to be the same in that the Overton window has to shift and has to move, and government necessarily moves slowly. As frustrating as that is, it was actually by our founders' design that government actually moves slowly. But what that means is that not everything that we propose may get passed and may get signed into law the first time around, but it's the effort, the education over time that advances it over the next year, over the next 2 years, and hopefully relatively soon down the road, we're better off for the advancement that we're doing today.
I completely agree with you. And so you guys might be wondering, I came to Mining Disrupt to talk about Bitcoin mining. I'm a Bitcoin miner. We're here talking about policy. I know there's tons of other subjects that are more cool and awesome, but policy is critical. And as the representatives have mentioned earlier before, you may not care about politics, but politics cares about you. So Dennis, would you be able to share with the audience, why should Bitcoin miners, especially if you're a Bitcoin miner or even just a Bitcoin holder, why should they care about state policy?
I mean, state policy is critical for Bitcoin miners. Aside from the conversation that I had earlier about protecting Bitcoin miners from government overreach or discrimination, which is really important, the vast majority of energy policy actually takes place at the state level. So if you want a new rate, power rate, if you want to see a grid balancing program, if you want to see the development of RTOs and ISOs, you name it, all that stuff, it all happens at the state level. So if you're planning on being in a state where you want that state to say, hey, in the future, we want to offer the same grid balancing programs that Texas has, which have been an incredible revenue driver for those Bitcoin miners in that state, you have to engage at the state level in order to see those items progress. Certainly, there's a lot of federal policy that's important, but the vast majority of that energy policy takes place at the state level, either through the legislature or when it comes to energy policy specifically, you're going to see that happen at the Public Utility Commission, Public Service Commission level, where there's a totally different body that you need to lobby, which you can, of course, go to the legislator and tell them to tell the public utility commissions what to do, but they don't typically like that too much. So generally, we like to go to the public service commissions. And I would say that's definitely the most important reason for why Bitcoin miners should care, not just because it's some sort of philosophical, oh, this is the right thing to do. it actually is impacting your bottom line directly.
So I'd look at it from both a practical standpoint and a philosophical standpoint. For me, I'm a big proponent of the 10th Amendment. And for those of you that don't know what the 10th Amendment is, essentially it says those pieces in the U.S. Constitution that isn't specifically laid out for the federal government to do is left to the states to do, and that's the policies that most directly impact you. So as we're focusing at the state level, in my view, it's actually a stronger advocates of our U.S. Constitution, which I'm deeply reverent of. Now, with that, I mean, you also have to look at the zoning regulations and the actual local municipalities. So, like, one of the things that we're working on at the state level is trying to rein in local governments in their ability to prevent people from mining in their local townships. And to me, it just doesn't make sense. Right now in Michigan, if there's a township that's zoned industrial, or an area that's zoned industrial, the local government can tell you, well, you can't mine here, even though you can mine a quarry there, right? Like, you could actually dig a mine, but you can't. They could tell you that you can't mine crypto and or mine Bitcoin, and to me that just doesn't make sense. And so we're trying to advance policies that at the state level that the federal government just has zero control over, nor should they have control over.
So in Pennsylvania, we're currently in this fight now. And I can make it really real, really quick for all of you as miners in the space. Baseload energy, baseload energy, baseload energy. Goldman Sachs came out with a report a couple months ago that anticipates the next decade of development with data centers and energy use to exceed that growth rate over the last century. What that means is there's going to be more pull onto the infrastructure. In Pennsylvania, in the region that I'm from, there's a single county that has enough coal to be able to power the entire Commonwealth for the next 100 years. Now, don't get lost. I'm not suggesting that all of us leave here and we suddenly be pro-coal. I don't have anything against that. But what I do want you to leave here with is the understanding that we have the natural gas within the United States. We have the oil, we have the coal, we have the alternative forms of energy generation to be able to eliminate the strains and pressure on our energy infrastructure so that there is not a concern with the base load energy that will be required to shepherd us forward into this next chapter of American productivity. We saw this in the Industrial Revolution. In the Northeast region of Pennsylvania, where I represent, we generated the coal that was shipped to Pittsburgh to then forge the steel necessary for that revolution to occur and bring the prosperity necessary here within the United States that we still enjoy today. What we need to focus on is that as miners, as advocates within the space, that we focus on policies that make it easier to generate energy here in America and not harder. As Dennis mentioned, oftentimes, whether it be at the municipal level, like the leader just spoke to, or at the state level, that policy can be most effectively crafted at those local levels, not at the federal level. In Pennsylvania, the chair of the policy committee for the Republican caucus, Representative David Rowe, his first series has been on this subject. I sit on the AI Opportunity Task Force in Pennsylvania, chaired by Representative Stephanie Schlaba in the western part of Pennsylvania. And we just had a federal and state lawmaker top to top with AI data center and innovative stakeholders within the Pittsburgh geography. And the concern that came away from that is ensuring that policies like RGGI in Pennsylvania, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, are eliminated and replaced because those policies hurt the production of generating energy for that base load need that you all are going to require, that we already require today. So I've talked too much, but I just, again, want to make sure that you all leave here with the understanding that it is critical for the future success so that you are not experiencing outages, that you are not experiencing strain, that you are not being unfairly painted as the straw man or the boogeyman in this space, that instead the real issue, policies that prohibit the generation of baseload energy, that real issue be the one that's addressed, not the innovation that you guys are bringing forward.
So, you just mentioned how Bitcoin miners face unfair treatment, which is something that I'm sure everyone here in this audience can relate to. And Dennis, I'll ask this question to you. At Satoshi Action, we've always prided ourselves on ensuring that Bitcoin miners are treated equally and are treated fairly compared to other data centers such as AI, HPC, cloud providers. Would you be able to walk us through, the threat that Bitcoin miners face currently in Nebraska and what our team is doing to combat these negative attacks that are specifically targeting Bitcoin miners and treating Bitcoin miners unfairly?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate right now. We have a bill that has been pushed forward very aggressively by an influential lawmaker in the state of Nebraska that wants to apply an excise tax, a tax directly on Bitcoin miners. And of course, given the thin margins that Bitcoin miners are operating on all the time, this would virtually eliminate the ability if this bill in its current version were to pass into law. So we've been bringing together various stakeholders. I know there's many miners I even met here that I wasn't aware that were in Nebraska. It became sort of a hub for mining recently, and we've been on the ground fighting back, bringing together the different stakeholders, working with our team on the ground to ensure that lawmakers across the state understand why this type of bill is not something that is going to be helpful for the state of Nebraska. Because you think, oh well, we can get all this money from the Bitcoin miners, but they're going to be gone. They're not going to be there anymore. So we cannot see things like this pass into law. And with regards to other components that we see across the country, the leader mentioned zoning. This is a major problem. There's the reason why we have a whole Bitcoin rights bill. Well, we don't just say, well, you have the right to mine Bitcoin. We actually specifically eliminate various forms of discrimination, which we've seen take place all across this country. And we've seen it time and time and time again. They have specific attack vectors. And one of them is to say, well, we're going to rezone this area, or we're going to make it so your miners aren't allowed in this type of zoning area. And so what we've essentially said in our model legislation is that you simply cannot discriminate through zoning. And there's also a noise component as well too. There's noise from miners. We all know that, right? But there's a lot of industries that create noise. But all of a sudden we started seeing these bills that were like, Bitcoin miners have to have a lower decibel level than any other industry. Well, that's a form of discrimination. We shouldn't be allowing that. That's also in our right to mine bill. Same thing with rate schedules. We saw in the state of Idaho was the first one to do this. They actually create a special rate for miners that was much, much higher than the traditional large load rate. And so we created our model policy based off that. Funny enough, when we finally went back to Idaho to try to introduce that legislation into law, or introduce that legislation and try to pass it into law, the energy companies didn't like that so much. So we went to war with these energy companies. And I'm sure you guys could probably attest to just how powerful some of these utilities and energy companies are within your own state as well. But we are going to continue to fight at Satoshi Action to eliminate these forms of discrimination and also protect that right to mine Bitcoin from now and into far into the future.
I want to hit two things on that. So if I get to point two and forget what I was talking about, remind me
That's right,
to hit
yeah.
point two. So point one is what he just talked about is why it's critically important that you're at the table, right? Like if Satoshi wasn't at the table, so if Satoshi Fund wasn't at the table when Nebraska was pushing legislation to tax miners, it just would have gone through, and nobody would, and it would have negatively impacted your industry. And the person that pushed it may be well intended. I don't know. Maybe he just thought, okay, this isn't going to negatively impact the industry, but it's going to help bring more money into the state where we could fix our roads. Or maybe it was well intended, but because somebody was at the table, they were able to say, look, here's the deal. This is the negative consequences of this action. And it's so keep that in mind. That's why it's critically important that you're at the table. Now, when it comes to the utility companies, I don't know if Michigan is unique. I don't think Michigan is unique in this scenario, but in Michigan, we have what's called a government granted monopoly, where 120 years ago, the government created a monopoly and authorized a monopoly in the utility space. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows that when there's a monopoly, that monopoly has the ability to fluctuate prices however they deem fit. There really isn't any competition to direct the pricing. And so when there's a monopoly, they fight as hard as they can, tooth and nail, to maintain that monopoly status and not have it challenged. And so when Dennis mentions he went to war with them, that doesn't surprise me because they don't give an inch, because as soon as they give an inch, they end up giving a mile. And so keeping that pressure on is critically important.
Thank you for that. And I also just want to give a huge shout out. Many of the miners attending this conference actually testified with us in Nebraska in the state capitol to really push against this harmful legislation, which was going to implement a 2.5 cent excise tax per kilowatt hour usage, which would have just crushed a lot of the mining sector in Nebraska. And when I spoke to some of the miners, they said that if this bill was implemented into law, their tax bill was going to shoot upwards of north to $5 million just overnight, which would have just been outrageous. And so I also just want to take some moment of time to also allow you guys to explain the amazing legislation that you guys yourselves are pushing forward. So, Leader Pothemus, let's just start with you. Would you be able to share with the audience the current status of your SBR bill, the progress, and what actions you think need to occur for it to become law?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in January, I announced our first phase of a three-phase program introducing different digital asset, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin legislation. Kind of the anchor of phase one was a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Right now, it's been introduced in the House of Representatives. We're waiting for a committee hearing in the House of Representatives. My expectation is that hearing will happen sometime toward the middle or end of April, and my hope is that it'll pass the committee. I think it will. I've met with the committee chair a couple times. In fact, the committee chair will likely be joining as a sponsor on phase two of our packages, and so we'll be in a good spot there. My expectations is that we'll get it out of out of committee in mid-April, hopefully out of the House by beginning of summer, and then we're going to be hitting a roadblock in the Senate. Our Senate is controlled pretty strongly by Democrats that don't necessarily have the same view on crypto that I have. And so that's not to say that all Democrats have that view. It's a bipartisan package, and all of them are going to be. But the Senate Majority Leader, my understanding is just it doesn't have the knowledge and understanding, and so there has to be a lot of education over there in order to get it across the finish line. So we'll see. We're working that process. We expect to introduce phase two in the second week of April, and we expect to introduce phase three. And phase two is going to be primarily anchored with Bitcoin Bill of Rights. And then phase three will be introduced probably toward the end of summer, and that's going to be primarily anchored with some legislation to help address the debanking issue.
Thank you. That's huge. Debanking is a huge issue that a lot of Bitcoin miners are facing, and so really appreciate your work to address that. Also, want to allow Representative Leadbeter to offer an opportunity to explain his Keystone Digital Asset Custody Fund bill as well the SBR bill that you're pushing through. So, would you be able to share the audience the amazing work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. So as the leader outlined, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve is a model policy that every state within the union needs to not only be advocating for, but implement. Could not have done that without the collaboration and partnership with Satoshi Action. So again, Dennis, thank you for all the support there. Again, we want to have that alignment across states with fiscal responsibility. One of the drivers for me, I have two young daughters at home, and when we look at the state of Pennsylvania and our budget, over the last two budget cycles, we have passed a budget that is billions of dollars over taxable revenues. And when we look at our reserves and we look at the rainy day fund that we call it back home in PA, that continues to be depleted despite investment opportunities. And when we analyze what that is, we understand with a 2% inflation rate, that half-life on that pile of money, whatever it may be, is about 35, 36 years. And so we're going to be in this hamster wheel where the only prize left is a devaluing of the assets that we hold. Whereas creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve enables and empowers the states across America to be able to recapture not only solidarity within what it is that they are doing from a fiduciary capacity, but also be confident in that they are shepherding forward the taxpayer dollars in a manner that ensures that prosperity can be extended to future generations. We're not watching commodities burn and be depleted. We're actually watching something grow and increase the prosperity and the power of the states that enact this. So it's my hope that Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the other states that have worked collaboratively with Satoshi Action are able to get this done. One thing that's unique in Pennsylvania, and it's ironic that the leader's here and has the bicameral split that he does. I'm in the minority by one seat in the House, and then the party that I'm a member of is in the majority in the Senate. And so it's somewhat of an inverse to what he is navigating. And so what that creates is a necessity for collaboration. The same collaboration that's modeled by you all in your contributions, support, and association with Satoshi Action, the leader and I need to model in our state houses as well, with our state officials, with our governors, with the administrations. And the reason that that became and is still important is it leads to incremental opportunity. You guys bring Dennis and the team ideas that they can then run with. They bring you concerns and battlegrounds like what happened in Nebraska. And you can then capture those opportunities and translate it into results. In my collaboration with the treasurer and with the attorney general in advocating for this reserve, the attorney general's feedback was somewhat concerning because there was Bitcoin being seized through his scope and his office, and he was unsure if the fund and the reserve would be one and the same. Rather than having that ambiguity and in collaborating with Dennis and the team, we were able to identify a parallel strategy that the reserve would be proposed and implemented upon approval, but then that this fund that the attorney general and law enforcement could access would also be created, ensuring that there are no orphaned Bitcoin within the environment and ecosystem of Pennsylvania. This is an example of why that collaboration is important. The collaboration is important because that issue would never have been addressed or brought forward if we had not been proactive in having the discussion. Guys, the problems that we can be preventative about are always easier to fix than the ones that we have to react to. You guys saw it in Nebraska. You hopefully are going to leave with confidence knowing that the work that Satoshi Action is doing in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and the other geographies that they're engaged in are going to translate in a similar way. And it's really exciting to see all this stuff come forward.
Yeah, and I think you make an excellent point by being proactive. Unfortunately, when certain bills such as in Nebraska occur, Satoshi Action has to mobilize very quickly and become reactive. But for us, we want to become proactive and move on the offensive and pass legislation that not only defends Bitcoin mining, but defends the entire Bitcoin space. So I mentioned there's lots of people out here today and envisioning wanting to become more active, get connected with their elected officials. And something that I always communicate to Bitcoin mining companies is that you're providing a huge value, especially if you're in rural communities. You're providing jobs, you're providing tax revenue for your district. And so I encourage everyone to always get connected with their elected officials because these are the first people who are going to defend you should an anti-Bitcoin mining bill occur. And so I just want to open this question up to either representative. What would be your recommendation for a Bitcoin mining company who is considering reaching out to either their state representative, state senator, or even their senator or member of Congress? How should they start to become involved in this?
So first of all, again, remember, if you're not at the table, you're on the table, right? Just keep that in mind. That should be your mantra when you're talking about trying to advocate for policy. Don't just expect that the policy is going to go in your favor. You have to be advocating for your industry. You have to be advocating for your business. When it comes to reaching out to an elected official, I understand sometimes that can be intimidating for people. It shouldn't be. Like, we're all just normal people, and frankly, a lot of the people that you might meet, you might be a little underwhelmed with, especially when it comes to the knowledge that they may or may not have with regard to digital assets or Bitcoin. You are going to be the expert matter. You're going to be the expert in the subject matter, right? And so, first of all, follow your legislator, your member of Congress on X or on Facebook, whatever you have. Find them there, That's a good way to at least see if they are engaged in the topic. That's step one. Reach out to their office. Most legislators, at least in Michigan, and I assume this is probably national, most legislators hold local coffee hours. Every month, I have 2 coffee hours in my district where I send out a notice in a newsletter. I post it on all my social media, and it's welcome to the public. And it's one-on-one conversation. I stay until everybody's done. One-on-one conversation where we talk about what is the number one thing on their mind. What are the challenges that they're facing? That's the best way to first start that engagement. Once you have that, and then also just reach out to their office. See if you can go to them. See if they're willing to schedule a meeting in their office with you. Most of the time, they will be, or at least with their staff. Once you get your foot in the door, you can demonstrate the value in that by demonstrating your knowledge in the information, and demonstrating why it's important to the state. And then from there, you can try to set up a what would be called a Seder dinner, and just set up a meeting with maybe a group of legislators and a group of people from your industry, and that becomes valuable to those legislators. So that's kind of where I would start. Rep, what would you do?
Yep, Mr. Leader, everything you said is spot on. Guys, remember, with any issue, there are two sides, and you never get the option of zero being pitched. There are two sides with any issue, and you never get the option of zero being pitched. Your opponents, or maybe a less combative way to describe it, people who are philosophically opposed to what we're advocating for, they are mobilized. They are vocal. The legacy institutions, the historical way that the financial world has operated over the past centuries, they know how to contact their elected officials. They have teams ready to do so, and they are consistent and persistent in advocating for their position. This is why it is so important that we get off the couch. The status quo doesn't exist. I'm a private sector guy. I worked for a global corporation before getting into office. Dennis knows the story well. And, one of the things that I reminded folks then when they were my employees in the private sector, things get worse or things get better. They do not stay the same. And you guys know that with your homes and with your companies and your operations. You're either taking steps to improve or you're letting off the gas and things are falling apart. That is the same thing with policy. You do not get the option of zero sides being advocated for. So I would encourage you that it is not just a good idea to engage with your local and state officials. It is a necessity.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I also want to always emphasize how a lot of people assume that they have to go directly to the politician. And this is something that I've learned in my time in DC. Oftentimes, if you schedule a meeting with a politician, the moment you step out of the room, they're going to ask their staff, "What do you think?" And if you have not built relations with their staff, they'll most likely say, "I don't know this person," and just move on to the next thousand other issues that they're focused on. It is critically important to also build relations with staff. And if you build relations with staff, that will then lead to productive conversations with the politician level meeting. So Dennis, I'm sure there's lots of people out in the audience who, now feel a lot more engaged and emboldened, who want to get more involved in Bitcoin advocacy. What are some simple steps that a Bitcoin holder or Bitcoin mining can do to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, some were mentioned already, but just a real quick comment on your point around staff. There's a saying in DC and all across the country, personnel is policy. And so if you want to expect to have an impact in any office, congressional or state level, you really do have to engage staff members. And in fact, we're almost more happy to engage the staff oftentimes in DC than the lawmaker themselves, because they're just whizzing around and, they're relying on 20, 30, 40, 50 people, depending on if they're a freshman or if they're in majority or if they're in leadership. So by going in and integrating with the staff and working with them and getting to them to a good place, you're going to get a good insights for where the lawmaker stands. But also, as Tom mentioned, when the lawmaker finally turns around and has conversations with the staff is going to support the ideas. and the policies that you want to suggest. But things that people can do that can make a difference besides for just meeting with the staff, meeting with the lawmakers, writing letters is a really big one. I had Senator Lummis, we were doing an interview back in DC about a month ago, and we had chatted during off camera, and she was saying, what we do is whenever there's a major issue, she says, I turn to my staff and I say, how many letters were written in support and how many letters were written against? So even if, a U.S. senator who might not have all the time to read every single letter, even if they don't read every single letter, they still calculate it. They still take it into consideration. So that's a really big component. And obviously, of course, getting out there and supporting groups, volunteering for groups that are active in the space. About a year ago, we did a giant book drive. We handed out a couple of different Bitcoin books to literally every single congressional office in Washington, D.C. by hand. We walked them in. The fun part about it was that we had some pro-Bitcoin lawmakers who were already on our team who immediately were like, I'm so glad you did that because now I can walk to every office and say, did you read your Bitcoin book yet? There's lots of stuff like that that you can engage on. Certainly letters, direct engagement of any type is usually the best format.
Thank you for that. So I know we're coming up close to time. I just want to quickly do some closing remarks. So why don't we start with you, Representative Leadbeter?
Sure. Tom, thank you so much, guys. Again, this is a lot heavy stuff we talked about. But again, you're not alone. You guys have partners like Satoshi Action. Without this team assembled here and without the collaboration from all of you, we wouldn't be able to be the advocates we are in the positions that we hold. So thank you all for having us. Continue to remain engaged, continue to keep this as a top of mind issue, and really appreciate the time. Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, Tom.
So first of all, I hope you all understand what you have with Satoshi Action Fund and the advocacy that they are doing on your behalf. And so keep that in mind, lean into that, follow them in every way, shape, or form. They are really carrying the water nationally on your behalf. They truly are. Now, one other thing that I want to leave you with is there's never been a time where the momentum is as high and as strong as it is right now, globally, nationally, locally. Like there's not even close. And so you should keep that. You should look at that as number one, a motivator, but number two, a call to action. Because when the momentum starts, that's when it's easiest to push it further. That's when it's easiest to continue it. If you let off the gas and that momentum dies, it's the laws of inertia really are tough in politics. And so while you have that momentum is a time to double down. So thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Dennis, thank you very much. Tom, thank you very much.
I couldn't agree more. I constantly tell people, the political headwinds can change all the time. You got to keep your foot on the gas and try to get as much done as we can while we're in this environment where lawmakers writ large are listening and are interested and want to move good policy forward. But just as you said kind things about Satoshi Action, one thing that we really need to keep in mind is that literally none of this is possible. No bill can be passed into law by Satoshi Action without a lawmaker who's willing to sponsor it, carry it forward, put their name on the line, actually take risk. It's great for us. We just are a Bitcoin group, right? And we do digital asset policy, and we're interfacing with you. So we generally get, pretty good support. There's not a whole lot of people out there that want us to stop doing what we're doing. But these lawmakers, they have to deal with both sides of the aisle. They have to deal with people that are like thinking that Bitcoin is a scam. And they're out here on the edge trying to be like, we think the government should buy Bitcoin. So it's an incredible, I think, risk that they take. I think they do it because they deeply care about their states. They deeply care about Bitcoin, and they really want to see their state be a leader on it. But you need to make sure, because they're going to face, no matter what issue it is, you could be giving free food out. Obviously people are going to be opposed to that. That's like too much government spending, right? Same thing with Bitcoin. There's always going to be someone who's going to oppose it, no matter what. There's going to be someone out there that wants to see it go away, a lawmaker that's against it, the constituency that's against it. And so by coming in and supporting them, whether financially or just showing up to their events or writing letters for the bills that they're trying to get done, anything that you can do to add weight to their ability to get legislation across the finish line is going to make it a meaningful impact for them. And then lawmakers who are sort of on the fence too will be like, wow, these guys are really getting a lot of support. This is a real movement. And a lot more lawmakers are going to start to come on board. And we're going to see our country all of a sudden go from being heading towards our leadership position on Bitcoin to being solidified as a leader on Bitcoin for hopefully generations to come.
Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this panel, and stay humble and stack sats.